Right. So, what we discussed in the last session about the system design part, designing of the system, wherein we discussed about high-level designs followed by the low-level design, all that. And today I'm going to discuss about architectures because in the previous session, if you remember, I discussed about enterprise architecture. In this enterprise architecture, I discussed about even business architecture, application systems, uh, data architecture, right? So all these things are comes under enterprise architecture. So finally, architects will prepare solution architecture for the project. Solution architecture, nothing but a technical roadmap, I can say, because if a development team or a technical team wants to construct an application or develop an application, there must be a technical roadmap is required, which is combination of all the kind of required applications which are connected to that, the kind of systems which are integrated to this, the kind of data which is transferring from one system to another system. This complete understanding is always needed, especially when we are developing any architecture. So architecture plays a vital and important role in any of the projects. This is nothing to do with any technology. This is nothing to do with domain. For example, when we are developing cloud applications as an individual, as an architect team, for example, we need to have a knowledge how to create cloud architecture. That's how generally the differences are. Next, one more thing to be discussed and one more thing need to be understood here as far as the architectures are concerned. These architectures must be scalable in nature, point to be noted. Why scalable? The reason is if there is any kind of changes happens in any of the process. For example, if there are some changes was made in the process of the solution you are going to develop, architecture should have a provision to make some changes in it. That's what the flexibility one we have to understand, because that flexibility is always needed when we are working on the applications. So when it comes to the architecture point of view, this is what something which I'm explaining about web application architecture. You can see it on the screen, what I'm showing you. This is majorly for web applications, because there are multiple applications. Last time I told you, right? So some are standalone applications like Excel, all that are comes under that category. Next, few are client server applications, like both client and as well as server systems will be there. So we will be accessing the data from the server and we are using the client systems. That's what client system or client system architecture or client system applications are. The third category, web applications. This is something which is prominent and regular used by us, because whatever the access you are doing, for example, you wants to do an online shopping, right? So being an individual, being a user, what we do, right? So we access the server of a portal through an URL. Make sure you need to have an internet connection through an URL and you are accessing the data. You see what are the products which are available in that. And in that portal, whatever the products we wants to purchase, so we will select those, we put it in the shopping cart and we do the billing. Subsequently, we get the delivery to our doorstep, right? So this is the overall concept, shopping concept. So this is web applications. Web applications means what are the application which is required a web. Like web I can tell you simply an internet, which is somewhere connecting to web is what we call it as web application. Now in this web application you see, because as I have told you in the previous session about the layers, right? So presentation layer, business logic or data layer, in the same manner, the same way, because that presentation layer nothing but the front end, whatever you can see over here. This is where generally front end. So normally these front ends are something used to create So whatever the front page designs you see, either it can be the product description page or the list of products which are available for us to buy online, or else it can be a login, right? So whatever the users can see. So users can even provide an input there. At the same time, they can see the reports also, because collecting the data further, generally they use it. Yeah. So here you can see a user is the person who collects the data from you, generally from what users can see over here. This is what front end you can see. To design this front ends, normally there are different technologies front end people, because there will be a separate team nowadays. We call it as front end developers or full stack developers now, because earlier we used to have separate front end team and user interface and UX design team. That's how earlier it was. But now in technology nowadays in the industry, what we are calling it as full stack development team. Full stack developers means you must be having knowledge over the front end designing. You must have a knowledge over the back end part. We must be having a knowledge over the business logic in middle, whatever the business logic we are going to write. So this is all something which we call it as full stack development we call it as. The full stack knowledge is what something which we have to be good with. Full stack development is all, this is all comes under the full stack part. So now the situation has changed. Earlier it was three different, because there will be a database team as separate, development team as separate. At the same time, UI and UX designing team will be as separate. Even now in some projects you can see, but slowly it is transforming towards full stack perspective. So full stack developers will usually do this front end part, right? Or else UI UX designers and all. So they collect the data, whatever the data they want to see, user wants to see. User will be collecting the data, and whatever the results they wants to see, they can see, right? So either it can say input can be given over here, and we can see the output also. For example, you have given user ID password in the front end. Against to that, when if you want to log into a Gmail account or something, you see the result. Okay, that's what generally input as well as output we call it as. And whatever the input you are going to give, these inputs are nothing but forms. Usually we call it as forms. Inputs for example, if you want to give any input data, generally we prepare forms, right? HTML forms and all comes under that category. Next, output of the data. Output of the data we call it as reports. Input, output, input through forms, through HTML screens. Let's say you have updated all the customer records. So for that, you require a customer form. Who is the customer, right? So which product he has purchased, when he has purchased, right? So for example, billing purpose, right? So this is all form, right? So where you are giving input over in this. Report means, for example, we wants to know how many customers have visited our store and how many people have visited, and how much money or how much billing or how much sales happened so far in this day or in this month, or maybe in this hour, whatever it is, right? So different reports we wants to see. This is all for the better decision making. Yeah, any user wants. It can be a business user also. So for that, generally reports we call it as HTML forms and all we prepare. But when it comes to the reports and all, usually there are some third-party tools. Earlier we used to use like Crystal reports and all. So using those reports, this output data can be taken accordingly. That's how generally these forms and reports, everything are being used in regular intervals. In middle, whatever the business logic you are going to write, so that business logic comes under this category. You can see over here, right? So whatever the request and response, because through a front end, we are providing a request to the system. This is where generally this app logics will be. This is what we call it as business logic layer. This is what the logic called business logic. Means you are writing a logic over here, right? So to write the logic, you require a programming language based upon the request which we have received from the front end, because user has given some request to the system. So when he has requested something to the system, what will happen? There must be some logic which has to be written in back of it. For that, there are different programming languages we can use. Either it can be of Java, it can be of Python, etc. So different programming languages to write the code for the particular functionality. And this will be accessed in the backend. This is where, because whatever the required databases, everything will be stored over here. Because we create some data table, database team will create some different database tables. In this database tables, there are different columns will be created. So if there is any input of data is given, so that will be stored on the particular column, whatever the column we have. So in that column, it will be stored. And uh,
എന്ത് സോറി പറഞ്ഞു
any request we wants to see, if you want to see any kind of request or something called up, so you can say, you can take the request from that, and finally response will be given and the results will be displayed to the user. So when it comes to the web application architecture itself is concerned, this is where generally this front end will be there, where front end inputs will be given. Whatever the request received by the user, given by the user, that will be received, and this logic will be implemented. This is where developers will write the code. Either it can be a Java developers or something. And then next it comes to the server. Normally these servers are two types. Usually, generally we call it as two servers. So one is web application, web servers. Second are application servers. Okay, web servers in technical terminology point of view, web servers and application server, we call it as. Web servers means when you want to connect to any kind of web and all, web servers are used. Like for example, Tomcat, right? So etc. Right? So these are all something which we call it as web servers will be used. When it comes to the application servers, there are different application servers like WebLogic, WebSphere. Right. So at the same time, JBoss. Okay. So these are all different application servers being used. Web servers to connect to web. Application servers are used to connect the applications, internally speaking. So technical team has to use different web servers like Tomcat, etc. All that, so that whatever the data which was already created, but make sure the data has to be created prior. We have to create the data before, because database table will be created, and whatever the input are we going to give, everything will be stored in the database table. When and wherever it is needed, this data can be accessed from the database table, and subsequently we see the results accordingly. This is the general structure which normally happen for any web application architecture. So this is how generally an architecture will be of web application. People who are working for the role of a business analyst, especially speaking, because now and then, as I told you, like technical roles are becoming more important. So it's
Okay.
quite advisable to have that understanding about what are the different architectures do we have. All that. In that regard, this is what something which normally we call it as web application architecture. So when we are working, because most of the applications were web applications, and nowadays slowly we are transforming to the cloud. Cloud applications means application will be developed in the cloud environment, and you are accessing through the URLs which was given, right? So user ID, password, which was given by the cloud service provider, you are accessing it. But the major advantage, uh, especially in the cloud environment, is that if you are a user, if you are a business user, I can say, we don't require to maintain any infrastructure. For example, if you want to create any databases, right? So if you want to create any servers and maintaining servers, fileverse protection, right? So these sort of things are not needed when we are working for cloud applications, because on-premise applications, we require all these. We require server, we require firewalls to we require firewall protection. All these are needed on-premise. Cloud applications not needed, right? So because cloud applications that maintenance will be taken care of by the cloud service provider. Make sure it depends on the kind of services we have taken from the cloud service provider. Because last time also I told you when I discussed about cloud applications, if you remember, I told you. So infrastructure applications, infrastructure services you have taken. So they will provide you the infrastructure services, pay-per-use kind of. If you are using software as a service, you will be using only software to develop the application. Because software you have to buy, license cost we have to buy. In spite of buying the license cost, what we can do, we can uh, hire the software and we can develop the application so that you don't require to pay license cost as separate. Okay, whatever that you are using, the available software which is available over there, so you can pay and you can use it accordingly. So that is again depends on the user perspective. How many users are using, based on that cost will be calculated. That's how it is. Cost will be made. When it comes to the platform as a service, you want to construct an application, or if you want to build an application, you require some platform to be constructed with. This is what generally the web application architecture. So being into the role of a business analyst, I can say, or is it's of course this is not something only I can say only for a BA, but of course people whoever want to have a detailed knowledge over the architectural perspective, because development team, everybody are not exposed to architecture, point to be noted. All the developers are not exposed to architectures, because developers are the people or the technical people are experienced in writing the code, right? So preparing some user interfaces, right? So this is how generally these people are experienced. But unfortunately, these people doesn't have any exposure over the architecture point of view, because architects will be as separate. Not everybody have that access. So there is always important for them, because when they are going for next level, right? So senior levels, roles, etc. It's always important for them to know about the architecture, because technically how the application architecture looks like, right? How application architecture functions. That sort of knowledge is always needed.